This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. What is going to decide a winner for this quarterback competition? What's going to be important for the coaching staff when it comes to evaluating a winner in this quarterback competition? Those are the questions we don't ask ourselves enough when it comes to this subject, right? We spend a lot of time arguing about completion percentage in practice, arguing about who's throwing touchdowns, who's throwing interceptions, but we never really have stopped to ask ourselves, is that what they care about right now? Some people would assume because completion percentage and touchdowns and interceptions are important during a game, that would mean that they would be equally important during a practice evaluation. But that's not always how practice works. See, one thing this quarterback competition has revealed that I don't think enough people have talked about is the gap between how fans view a quarterback competition and how coaches view a quarterback competition. Because based on what lens you're looking through, you're going to get two completely different sets of results. And it's why quarterback competitions are always inherently controversial, right? A lot of people, and I talked about this in my last video, talk about quarterback competitions like horse races, right? Oh, this guy's starting in pole position. Like they'll literally use horse racing terms when discussing this, right? One's getting pole position, the other one starting out from, who's getting the better block to start out from, who's starting out ahead. Oh, Deshaun Watson pulled up. It reminds me of like how people talk about draft stock and how disconnected that is from the actual reality of what's going on, right? People talk about draft stock in a very similar way, as if it's literal stock, right? People will talk about draft stock like it's a literal stock on the S&P 500 you can track. That's not how draft stock works, right? They'll be like, oh, after a good practice, the stock went up. After a good 40, the stock went up. Usually the stock rising or lowering is really just the media reacting to momentum, public momentum that a player is seizing rather than an actual live depiction of that player's draft stock. Fernando Mendoza is a perfect example of this. I brought on people, Steelers DB, Derek Bell, Corey Kinnan, JP Acosta, who live in that draft space. And when I talked to those people in March of 2025, they told me that they think that Fernando Mendoza is going to be the number one quarterback of this class and possibly a number one overall pick this year. That was, or at least sounded like a crazy take in March, when a lot of people reacted to it as if it was crazy because not a ton of people have seen Fernando Mendoza play. Those who have were singing his praises, but not a lot of people had seen him play. And then the season goes on. Fernando Mendoza has the season that he is. And all of a sudden, his stock has risen all the way up to being a first-round pick. But that's not really the case. The people who have been scouting the whole time in the NFL probably always had Fernando Mendoza pretty high on their boards. And this season confirmed it. It didn't really change where he sat with this stock. The same thing goes when somebody has a great 40 time and then you see him shoot up mock drafts. It's not that teams change their mind because of a 40 time on a player, even though that does happen, right? Not every single decision maker in the NFL is good at their job. But more than likely that is a result of that player doing something that sparked public interest. He ran a good 40. And then reporters start asking scouts, asking people in the NFL, hey, what do you think of this guy? And then the scouts turn back to the reporters and go, oh, we've had this guy day 2 on our board. I don't know why the outside media is so low on him, but this guy's going to get drafted pretty high. And then the outside media goes, oh, his stock rose because of his 40 time. But the stock was always kind of there. We're just learning about it now, right? This happens when players fall in the draft, et cetera, right? The point is that draft stock does not operate in real time. The same way that a quarterback competition is not a race being judged in real time. A quarterback competition is a collection of practices that are being judged based on specific criteria, depending on what drill or what set that they're in, and it being heavily evaluated after the fact to see how consequential some of the results are in actually making the decision. So Todd Monken talks about this. He says, hey, don't read too much into what you see about interceptions, because interceptions in camp, in practice, are not the same thing as in games, right? Every interception you throw in a game, bad thing. But in practice, you might throw an interception, but if the process was good, then you feel like you could refine that and fix it later. So there are some interceptions that would be counted in the regular season, but in the context of a practice, in a quarterback competition, do not matter and might even be viewed as positive grades, right? There are plays where a quarterback does everything right, a wide receiver drops the ball, it gets intercepted. A coach during a quarterback competition, during something like what the Browns are doing, might look at that and go, hey, look, the process was right, the ball was good, it got out on time. That's a positively graded play, even though it ended in an interception. It's not unheard of for that to happen. But if you're viewing practice in the same context that you view a game, you're going to lose your mind, because that sounds absurd from that context. But it's very different at a practice, and it's why we can't view practice like a horse race or a quarterback competition like a horse race, because it's more of a process than that. You want to know the biggest weakness of the internet, the biggest weakness of people who are on the internet a lot, and just like in general? It's handling the dissonance of having information but not having context. We don't account for context enough on the internet. We have information. The internet has made it so that information is available to more people than it's ever been before, right? And if you've gone on the internet, you know that there's a ton of information there. But yet at the same time, while human beings have access to all this information, I consistently hear people feel like people are as dumb as they ever been before, right? You hear this sentiment a lot. That it's because we're given so much information that by the time that we get the context, we've made our mind up on what we think that context is, right? We're given more information than we need to start, and then we get the context later, or maybe we never get the context. And that is collectively whipping our ass. Information used to be harder to get, right? You had to be at a certain level to get information, which meant that you have to have demonstrated at some point a certain level of understanding of context about what you're trying to learn before you get the information, that only people who had the context got the information. Now it's the other way around. People get the information, they don't get the context. And when I say context, I want to be clear, because it's a very fluid term that people tend to abuse, right? In order to make excuses for whatever argument or whatever they're trying to do. When I say we're missing context, I'm being very specific in terms of this quarterback competition. And that context isn't necessarily about the result. The context that I am referring to is about the process and how things are being judged and what's actually being graded and weighted in those grades versus other things. We don't have the rubric to this quarterback competition, but yet every day somebody's telling you that someone's winning it. And it's like, what rubric are we basing this on? Nobody has one. That's the context that we're missing. The rubric. That's what I mean. This quarterback competition is a microcosm of that. We have a lot of information. We don't have a ton of context, but in absence of context, people start making up their own context and criteria and how this should be judged, which means that no matter what the decision is, a bunch of people are going to be shocked at the end of the day because they created their own context to judge this information instead of just accepting that they don't have the context to the situation. A lot of us are trying to write a 5-page term paper and not read the rubric. Right? That's basically what's happening. We try to turn in an essay and we ain't read the rubric, and now we got an attitude that we didn't get the grade that we thought we should get when we didn't read the rubric in the first place. That's basically what sports Twitter is in a nutshell, but especially when it comes to a quarterback competition. What is the context in which we're framing all of this quarterback competition stuff in? What really matters? What could determine this quarterback competition? We'll get into that more, but first I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 sports pick app. The app is really easy to use. For player picks, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. That's it. Rather just pick teams, PrizePicks has that now too. Just pick the winner, spread, or total in any game or fight. PrizePicks is available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. Plus, you can even follow me on the app at Quen_C. Tell my picks, one click, and follow your friends too. Best of all, play your first $5 and get $150 in lineups if you win. Just use the promo code HMA when you sign up. That's right. PrizePicks just switched up their offer, so there's no better time to join. Lock in and win with that first lineup. That's code HMA at sign up to get $150 in bonus lineups if you win with your first $5 or up lineup. I am friends with a number of beat writers for the Cleveland Browns. One of my friends is Jared Mueller, who works for SB Nation and covers the Browns for Dogs by Nature. He does a great job. He's a good friend of mine. And I've seen him point out and try to make this point to people. And obviously you try to make a point to people on the internet, they get mad at you. So people are getting mad at him about this. But the point that he's making, I think, is one that's arguing for understanding the context of this situation, right? Which is he's saying that people are underestimating the amount that procedural stuff is going to matter for this quarterback competition. And the reason he's making that argument is the context of this quarterback situation that a lot of people aren't really looking at, right? The only context people are aware of is that Shador is battling Deshaun Watson for the starting quarterback job, right? But add in some more information to kind of color that picture. One, the Cleveland Browns are starting over completely on offense. An entirely new offensive line, an entirely new wide receiver room, basically. An entirely new offensive staff outside of maybe 2 or 3 coaches. A new offense completely, new offensive line schemes, new protections, all kinds of new stuff that they need whoever wins this competition to be able to process all of that new stuff and be able to spit out something in the huddle that is coherent, right? Basically, a lot of what the Browns are asking a quarterback to do, especially in the early parts of the season, it's not going to be highlights. Yeah, I think the Browns understand Like, as much as they try to like convince us that this quarterback room is a blessing and they have the best quarterback room in the NFL or whatever they're trying to sell you, right? Because they got to sell tickets at the end of the day. The Browns truly do understand that they don't and should not have high expectations for this quarterback room, right? They're not putting together a game plan that's like prime Big Ben, let's throw the ball 50 times and get at it. Right? That's not what the Cleveland Browns are trying to do this year. What the Cleveland Browns are trying to do, they've made it very obvious. They're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to throw off of that sometimes. They're going to take some shots downfield. But the heart and soul of this team is going to be defense, and it's going to be running the ball. That is what they're hoping for. That is what they're building. It is pretty obvious that that is what they're building. Right? And if that's the kind of team that you're building, the things you're going to value are going to be different. A lot of people are looking at this quarterback competition and saying, well, they think Shedeur is winning because Shedeur is making more highlight plays that we see on social media. And I want to be very clear here. I don't blame fans for seeing highlights of Shedeur and saying to themselves, oh, that means he's having an excellent camp. Because that is how the NFL has trained people to look at this, right? The NFL has trained people to look at practice like games because that's the most profitable way to handle the situation. And the NFL's a business at the end of the day, right? They want to sell training camp tickets in some cases, right? Sometimes they're not selling training camp tickets, but they're selling you a lot of stuff while you're at training camp. And part of you wanting to buy stuff is getting you excited about the team, right? When you're excited about the team, you hit up that merch stand and you start feeling real generous. They want you to feel good about that, right? To feel good about the preseason, to show up to the preseason game and spend on concessions and all of that, right? So they have conditioned casual and even hardcore NFL fans to look at practice like games, even if they're not really fully aware if that's what they've been doing. They've been doing this for years. Right. So I don't blame people when they see stuff like, oh, Shedeur threw more touchdowns in practice and saying to themselves, well, that means he must have had a better practice than Deshaun Watson. Case closed. Right. And running with that, because that is what the NFL has. The reality is that you could have a practice where visually to the fan in attendance, you looked awesome and still not make the coaching staff happy. Right? We see this with other positions all the time. How many times have I come on here after a preseason game and said, oh my God, Jamari Thrash has had an excellent camp, or insert player X, he's had an excellent camp. He's looked great when I've seen him in camp. And then the season rolls around and he doesn't play. Because what makes somebody look great in camp, when they're practicing, it might not be the same thing that coaching staff is looking for when they're actually doling out the objectives for practice, when they're actually doling out what their criteria is for judging these players, right? So it might be the case that Deshaun Watson is winning this quarterback competition, despite the fact that his practice stats, which, I'm so annoyed that that's even a thing, but his practice stats are worse than Shedeur, because maybe they're not valuing that part of it. Maybe they're valuing what's happening before a stat is even registered. Maybe they're valuing how fast they're getting things in and out the huddle. How much miscommunication is there? Is there pre-snap penalties when this guy is out there? How smooth is the operation? Those are the things that might matter to a team that doesn't plan to be super explosive through the air and might be planning on running the ball more, especially when you have all kind of new on every level of this offense. There is an argument to be had that that's the priority for the team. I don't think that would be crazy, right? There are certainly quarterback competitions that are about the statistical spectacle, right? Who throws more touchdowns in practice? And that being how they decide a winner. Sometimes quarterback competitions and quarterback evaluations for teams are very much about the process. This was the Kevin Stefanski way of doing things. And you can argue that the results for Kevin were not great, but other teams have done it that way and had success, right? The process, in evaluating the process strictly and not really getting caught up in the result, is how the Broncos found Bo Nix. It's also how the Browns ended up with Dylan Gabriel. So it's not perfect, but there are some coaches that are going to look at this and say, no, I don't really care about the process. About the process. I care about the results. Some coaches are going to be the opposite of that and really care about the process to the point to where they don't factor the results in as much because they think the results will change as long as the process stays strong. So what do I think is the criteria in which the Browns are judging this based on the context that is the 2026 Cleveland Browns, right? A run-heavy team, or at least a team that looks like they're built for run-heavy football, defensive-oriented football. What do we know about Todd? What do we know about this offense, how they're built, that can inform us on how they might judge a quarterback competition? One, I do think Jarrett has a point. I think a lot of the pre-snap stuff does matter to them, to the Cleveland Browns, right? Because what they don't want, especially if you're going to run the ball a lot, is to have self-inflicted wounds on drives that take you out of running the ball, right? Take you to a 2nd and 15. If the Browns were more okay with airing it out and they were planning on throwing the ball 50 times, maybe they're a little bit more lenient on stuff like that because they think they can get the chunk plays to outweigh it. But they're concerned about lost yardage, getting behind the sticks. This is also something that Kevin Stefanski was worried about for good reason, right? Your offense, when it's limited, when you're behind the sticks, is more limited. And if you take a limited offense and make it more limited, what you have is a terrible offense. So in order to get ahead of that, you want to stay ahead of the chains. So yeah, I do think that's going to matter. I do think that who handles the pre-snap stuff well, who's identifying certain things, who's having the best conversation with the coach after they finish their play, that matters too. If coach feels like one player is struggling on the field, but when they talk to that player about diagnosing those problems, it's a more coherent conversation than the other player who might be putting together better statistical results. But when you talk to them, you're not really sure what's going on there mentally because the communication isn't really clear between player and coach, then that player might not have the advantage that the stats make it look like. I'm not going to act like I have a passionate argument for one of these quarterbacks to start over the other. For the most part, I don't think there's enough separating them for me to get upset about any decision that is made about these quarterbacks. The biggest difference to me is who's under contract for the next couple of years and who's younger. And that happens to be Shedeur Sanders. So I'd rather start Shedeur if all things are equal, because I think all things are equal from what I've seen. But again, I don't have the context that the coaching staff is looking for, and I should be open about that and understanding that they might make a different decision than I would because of that context, because of their rubric, because of their criteria and what they're looking for. All I'm trying to do is expand the conversation of how we discuss this quarterback competition and future quarterback competitions. It's not always about what you see on the stat line. It's not always about what you see on the videos. There is a larger context that surrounds these quarterback competition, which is what do the coaches want to see on a given practice rep? And unless you're asking yourself that question, you're always going to be lost when looking at quarterback competitions. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.